Previously on the Garner Brothers.
Today on the Garner Brothers, the Venezuelan diet. I'm referring obviously to the famine. Being forced into a famine, and we'll all soon be following suit.
In the drought emergency, the North Bay is getting ready for water cuts.
Moderate to exceptional drought conditions.
No, this drought is far from over. 2021 is shaping up to potentially be the driest of all of the drought years in the last century, and definitely one of the driest of the last millennium.
55-gallon drums filled with potable water.
Growing, preserving, and storing.
It'll be daunting to gather all that, but it'll be easy, and you'll know exactly where you are and where you stand with your food.
You've got the food, you're going to need to consume the food, but then what?
Now, to give you guys a break from us and our continual jabbering and quote reading, we have a presentation for you that we would like you guys to see. We didn't put it together. It's from Helena Kleinlein, speaking of the current conditions, famine conditions.
Right, and this is just excerpts from her video. We recommend, if you like what you see, then go to her full video and watch it.
There's a lot of great information there.
She's not sponsoring this video in any way. I mean,
she does not know we exist.
No. We'll take sponsoring.
But good on her.
So enjoy this, and please go and visit her video on YouTube.
Armstrong Economics said that the next famine will begin in 2022. And they warned that we are currently reducing the food supply at a time when we should be stockpiling it. The church itself in October of 2020 said that double the number of people in 2020 are facing acute food insecurity. And the pandemic disrupted supply chains and crop distributions, all at a time of already exploding hunger. And then they gave an ominous warning. Without being too alarmist, if we do not address this crisis in a coordinated manner, it is projected to grow to be among the worst famine in human history. And there is a study done on PubMed that shows it takes about 2 years after an economic shock to see food shortages. 2021 has seen devastating weather all around the globe. There have been ice storms in some rare places, especially Texas and Arkansas, Kentucky, and Tennessee. There have been severe earthquakes in Iran, Argentina, Turkey, Asia, New Zealand, Japan, and the Philippines. And there have been severe flooding in the mid and southeast of the USA, Mexico and South America, Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Indonesia, and a very rare snowstorm in Israel. Because scientists are telling us that the sun is heading into a new solar minimum right now. Now, despite loud claims that man-made CO2 is somehow driving the climate, both history and science demonstrate that the most influential driver of planetary climate is actually the sun and its predictable cycles. NASA is reporting that there is a solar minimum coming, and so is the American Thinker. And they made an interesting comment, and they said, this coming grand solar minimum will have much more impact on the environment than anything we puny humans can do. A solar minimum. It's actually sunspots. And this is showing you 400 years of sunspot observations. You can see that the most severe solar minimum was the Maunder minimum, around 1650. We had another one, a Dalton minimum and a modern maximum. But they believe that we are heading into one that is similar to the Maunder minimum. What happens is temperatures drop globally, and this leads to shorter growing seasons, and it brings food shortages. I can't fully explain it to you, but these minimums create both droughts and floods simultaneously around the world. That leads to harvest failures, and then we have wars and revolutions. Are we really seeing any of this? Yes, we really are. In Minnesota in the spring, they had an unusual freeze injury to their corn. Canada is reporting late spring frosts that is destroying their fruit. And India is suffering its coldest June temperature ever recorded. Now, how is this affecting us in the Western United States? Well, drought. I am in Utah, and this shows you the U.S. Drought Monitor map of Utah. We are in exceptional drought. The water crisis went from dire to catastrophic as federal regulators shut off irrigation water to farmers from a critical reservoir, and they will not send extra water to the dying salmon downstream. And what about our dying bee population, also known as colony collapse disorder? Experts believe that we have lost a third of our bee population just in the last 15 years. If we lose our bees, we lose our food supply, and our shipping prices just keep rising globally. Why is this happening? Well, around the world, the pandemic closed ports and factories, reduced the workforce, and it stagnated production. This has just halted global shipping, and now we've got containers stuck around the world in wrong places. And it's actually taking longer to unload containers than it is taking to cross the Pacific. Here's an article from American Shipper. They are saying that the rates for container ships are off the chart at $135,000 a day. The market has become absolutely frenzied. There's more and more inquiry every single day, and people are panicking, and that is driving up the costs of just about everything we use. Well, the USA exports more food to the world than any other country. We predominantly export to Canada, Mexico, Japan, and China. And we keep committing more and more food, even though we too are experiencing agricultural decline, just like the rest of the world. Some of our farmers in Idaho have sold all of their 2021 crops to other countries, and many have committed their 22 crops also. Now, we have always been a very compassionate people, and we've always been able to afford to be. But are we sure that we can take care of our own? So just as this reduction in the world's volume of food, it is pushing us towards a crisis level. But we've always had a grain reserve. Well, historically, that is true. But the U.S. government sold all of our grain reserves in the 1996 Farm Bill. The U.S. has nothing in the emergency food pantry. There is no cheese, no butter, no dry milk powder, no grains, or anything else left in reserve. And this was produced just last week. It is showing you the U.S. spring wheat market. You can see that lower line is this year compared to the last 8 years. It is a little grim. This is National Geographic. They're putting it in writing for us. They're telling us the immediate goal is to reduce animal agriculture. And the governments of the world are discussing a sin tax on meat globally. But what they're not telling you yet is the end goal is to eliminate all animal agriculture. That is meat, dairy, eggs. The EAT Stockholm Food Forum just of last year, they were one of the first ones that came out and actually stated it. They said, our mission is to remove all animals from the food system by 2035. They also said our goal is to completely replace animals in the food system. You laugh, but we are completely serious about it, and it's doable. That was Pat Brown, the founder of Impossible Foods. The Stockholm Food Forum actually printed that their aim was to cut the meat and dairy intake of the global population and replace it with lab-made foods, cereals, and oil. Lab-made foods. How do you feel about that? Well, here's the World Economic Forum. They are suggesting that we three-dimensionally print steak to help us reduce meat consumption. And this is another article from the Food Revolution Network, and they are discussing lab-grown food, the pros and the cons. Is this far-fetched? Well, here's the Harvard Political Review actually stating that they also want to end animal agriculture. And our favorite teenage activist, Greta Thunberg, she has come out and said that both farming and ranching is dirty and dangerous. She says we should all be on a plant-based diet. And she says that our diet of eating animals creates a public health crisis like COVID. Okay, are we seeing this in our daily life? Yes, if you start to look, you will see the New York Times put out an article pushing meatless meat. And now you can read about growing seafood. And how does that do? You know, some people don't mind eating lab-created meats. Others do. Do you worry about your protein? Well, they have got a solution for that too. So back to the World Economic Forum. They are suggesting that you could eat worms for dinner, and Europe is backing insect-based food because it is a good protein source, and they don't use as many natural resources as animal agriculture do. Well, what about in America? Well, here's USA Today saying, how would you like your taco to have a cicada in it? We are starting to see this. What about our greens? So this is an article from IBM, and it talks about how they want to grow greens. The direction that vegetable and fruit production is moving is into traceability from seed to table. This will be accomplished through AI and blockchain science. And some people like the idea that you could come home and ask Google Home, Alexa, or Siri where your spinach came from. But as someone who cares about the nutrition in food, this is how they're going to grow the greens. If you know anything about nutrition, you know that the nutrition comes from the soil and gets into the plant. I am very concerned about what growing on styrofoam will do for the quality of the plant. So what are you going to do with all of this information? Because you always have a choice. But if you choose to stick your head in the sand and not listen, what is going to happen when our prophet, seer, and revelator turns out to be correct and we see famines, pestilences, and earthquakes? Well, the scriptures actually tell us what happens to those who put their head in the sand. They will lift up their voices and curse God, and they will harden their hearts against him. The Great Reset, most of us have probably heard of it at this point. It's being talked at all over. But this is what Klaus Schwab said, the founder. He said the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reimagine and reset our world. Oh, is that necessary? What the Great Reset really is, in layman's terms, it will be the greatest transfer of wealth and the greatest consolidation of power in the history of mankind. That is ominous. Again, the World Economic Forum has 8 main planks. One of their main planks is that they want a handful of countries to dominate. So how is this going to manifest? Well, the Rockefeller Foundation has put out Reset the Table. This is meeting the moment to transform the U.S. food system. I still ask, why do we need to transform our food system? But this is a plan to revolutionize the global food supply from the top down. This Reset the Table is the plan for the global food system, and it has 3 main objectives. Listen carefully. Number 1, to integrate the food system under a dominant global entity. Number 2, to collectivize and centralize control of the food supply under a global entity. To engender prosperity within the stakeholders of the global entity. Are you starting to see the picture? Who is that dominant global entity? Because it's not the people. Another plank of the Great Reset is, by 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy. How are they going to do that? Well, not fully sure. It's just beginning to roll out. But I would like you to go and look up BlackRock. BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager with $9 trillion in assets, and they are the leading proponent behind the Great Reset. They're buying up single-family homes at a premium, forcing the middle class to become home renters. We see this drastically in Utah. This will eliminate the middle class's ability to build wealth. And this is incredible because BlackRock is a Federal Reserve-funded financial institution. Basically, they are printing fiat money to be able to buy up homes so that the people cannot afford them. And it is not just BlackRock. It seems as if all the large financial institutions across the world are doing this. We're seeing this from Lloyd's of London, Vanguard, State Street. This is happening worldwide.
Too often, we bask in our comfortable complacency and rationalize that the ravages of war, economic disaster, famine, and earthquake cannot happen here. Those who believe this are either not acquainted with the revelations of the Lord, or they do not believe them. Those who smugly think these calamities will not happen, that they somehow will be set aside because of the righteousness of the saints, are deceived and will rue the day they harbored such a delusion.
We will see the day when we will live on what we will produce. I should like to address a few remarks to those who ask, do I share with my neighbors who have not followed the counsel? And what about the non-members who do not have a year's supply? Do we have to share with them? No, we don't have to share. We get to share. Let us not be concerned about silly thoughts of whether we would share or not. Of course we would share. What would Jesus do? I could not possibly eat food and see my neighbor starving. And if you do starve after sharing, greater love hath no man than this. Now what about those...
For decades, the Lord's prophets have urged us to store food, water, and financial reserves for a time of need. The current pandemic has reinforced the wisdom of that counsel. I urge you to take steps to be temporarily prepared.
And what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch.